Greetings, traveler. Have you ever been in a situation where you have to create multiple classes for a game, but at the moment you don't even have one to start with? Or you have to make many races for a game, maybe different weapons for a game, but even if you have a starting point, if you have some starting ones, or if you're starting completely from scratch, you're just at a loss for how to create all of them, how to make them feel individual, and how to make sure that when the player gets them in their hands, they feel that all of them are unique and that they're fun to play. Today, what I want to do is share with you my extremely simple framework for tackling this problem and talk about the concept first so you get a good understanding of the big picture of how we're trying to build this, and then jump into a concrete example so I can show you how you can apply this to developing new classes, new races, new weapons, new boats, new characters, or whatever else your game needs. My name is Santos. I've been working in the game industry for over 14 years now. And I remember when I first had to create a new element in a game that already had many elements like this, I was completely at a loss. I already knew what was in the game because the game was in service already. But when it was my turn to go and introduce an additional element to go with the existing ones, I just didn't know if the new element would be up to par to the existing ones, if it would be interesting enough to the player, if it would feel individual enough and it wouldn't be compared to something existing. And I always dreaded that situation. So what happened is that I studied how many other games tackle the same problem. Now, I don't know if this is the actual technique that game designers in other games use. This is just something that I put together and I tested it in the real world and it had fantastically good examples, so much so that my colleagues asked me to share this framework with them. They found it useful. Now I'm sharing it with you. So before we jump into a concrete example, let's get the big picture here. So let's say you want to create a game and it has 5 different classes. So there's the wizard, the warrior, the thief, whatever. And of course, this applies to creating new weapons or creating new races for your game. Whenever you have similar things that all follow more or less the same template, then this is the super duper easy mode of tackling that problem. So let's take, for example, the classes example. So instead of going in and doing the hard mode, which is writing down 17 different ideas and try to write notes for all these ideas and say, okay, this class should work like this, and that class is cool because of that, and so on. Instead of jumping into all of that, just create one of them. Simply create one and simply make sure that that one class or that one race or that one weapon or whatever you're working on is fun all by itself. If it's a multiplayer game, you can make sure already that even if 2 players are competing with the same class or with the same race or using the same weapon, the game should still be fun in that case and it should still function. So to start, you never need more than one of these examples to give you a proof of concept and to get you started. And once you have that, then you can use it as a template for generating everything else. I know this is a little theoretical right now, so let's jump into an example. So continuing with the classes example, let's keep it simple and you want to make a warrior and a ranger and I don't know, a thief perhaps. So let's start with the warrior. So the warrior, actually, let me pause and make it a little larger. So when you're working on your warrior, let's say you have already decided that some of the stats that you want to use in the game to show off what the warrior can do is the attack stat, the defense stat, and the stamina stat. Now, of course, these you can also choose freely, and it really depends on what you're working on. But this is just an example to explain this concept. So you say that for the warrior to function like a warrior, we want to show how balanced he is at everything, right? He's He's good at combat, but he's also good at endurance. He can attack, he can defend. He's very versatile in that sense. So we can give him a score of 50 for his attack and a score of 50 for his defense and also 50 for his stamina. Now, this sets a base, and like we said in the video the other day, numbers tell a story all of their own. So when a player who has never seen this game and doesn't know anything about the system, when they see just this little block of stats, they immediately think, okay, so this class seems pretty balanced, or it seems that all these things are equally important to this class, or this class is equally good at all these things. It gets across that message of equality and evenness in these stats. So based on that, when we go in and we put in these numbers, after we make sure that the game functions like we want it to with these numbers, and if it's a multiplayer game, we can do a warrior versus warrior matchup and do all the tests we want to make there, and we make sure that that works, then, and only then, we can go in and create the rest of the classes we want to make and have an extremely easy time making it. So let's jump into that. So for the next part, this marker is dying. Let me revive it. Okay, so the marker could not be revived and has now gone to meet his ancestors in the Valhalla of markers. So we have a new contender. So now that we have the warrior and we know what the warrior looks like, let's go ahead and design the thief and ranger. So again, this is completely up to the designer to give the flavor they want to each class and make them individual in a way that makes sense in that particular game. But in our case, we can simply say that the thief, because he's so sneaky and he's so good at getting away with whatever, then his defense is actually going to be higher than the warrior. And we're going to put it at 70. And because he's a thief and he's also pretty good at attacking and so on, then he's actually just as good as the warrior in his attack. But because he hasn't had the physical training of the warrior, then he has lower stamina. So let's put that at 30. Now, you'll notice that these values for the warrior, if we add them up, they all add up to 150. And for the thief, they also add up to 150. And again, this is a choice that we make. If we want to pass the message across that all classes in this game are equally strong, then this is one of the ways we could amplify that image and we can project it and communicate it to the player. However, if we have a game that has advanced classes or prestige classes or super duper special classes or whatever, or we just want to say that, look, the player belongs to this unique hero class that is simply better than everything else, this is again one way we can show it. But anyway, by distributing the stats this way, we have very, very little work to do because we did all the work to set up the warrior properly in the first place. When we set up the warrior, we had a concept for it, and we created a system that expresses all of the things the warrior can do, or at least all the things that we need in our game to be able to show off his abilities. And because we did so much work on the first class and we did the testing and the PvP testing and so on, we know that this part is solid, at least as solid as it can be for the moment. And now that we have this as a base, creating the thief is very, very simple, because we had the concept that the thief is more defensive, is equally good at attacking as the warrior, but he lacks the stamina, for example. And now that we have two examples, and of course we can go ahead now and do the same tests, do the thief versus warrior test, and again the thief versus thief. So now we can test so much more, and we can, here when we're doing the test, what we want to check for is that doing a thief versus thief matchup is, or a thief versus warrior, is as fun and as satisfying to experience as our original warrior versus warrior matchup. Or if this is a game where we're just attacking the environment, and let's say you're only attacking monsters all the time, then combat with the warrior against the monster feels just as satisfying as the combat with the thief against the monster. So if your game doesn't have PvP, this is another way you can test it. So after we've done all this, after we've made our tests and we're happy with the results, then of course we can move on to the ranger and say, well, the concept of the ranger is that he attacks from a distance, right? So he's very good at attacking. Defending, well, he shouldn't have to defend because he attacks from a distance, but if he has to defend, he's not so good at it. So let's try to put that. Oh, and also his stamina. Let's say that he's running around in the forest all day, so his stamina is pretty good. So let's say that his stamina is just as good as the warrior, for example, because he also does a lot of physical activity. His defense is much it's worse than the warrior. And see how we have the warrior as a baseline to do all these comparisons. If we didn't have that, this would be so much harder. It would be so much harder to sit there in a room and say, okay, warrior, thief, and ranger, how much should their stamina be? And you would be, on air the whole time. You would have no place to ground yourself, nothing to compare against. But now, because we have these, it's so much easier. So we say his stamina is just as good as the warriors because he also does a lot of exercise and so on. His defense, we said, is terrible. So we can put it down to, let's say, 20. So he's really not, in this game, he's not really good at defending at all. But because he's practicing his bow skills all the time, then we can put his attack at 8. And again, if we wanted to make the ranger stand out as a stronger class than others, we could put this at 90, 100, or whatever we need to do to show off how much stronger he is than the others. But to keep it balanced, this is another thing. This is one version of how we could do it. So that's in general the framework. And even though in this case we talked about creating different classes after we come up with one, you can just as easily imagine how this would work if instead of warrior here, we had, for example, scythe, and let's say dagger and bow, and had different parameters for those. So how quickly they attack, how strong they are, and so on. And if this wasn't a battle game at all, then it would be just as simple. So if you have different characters and all these characters simply do conversation in a story-based game, then they could have parameters like persuasion and lying and I don't know, whatever else makes sense in that game. If it was races, you could say that the humans are, for example, very resilient. They can survive in many environments, but when you compare them to, I don't know, this crazy alien race, they're not as strong and they're not as fast, but the alien race is not very adaptable. You can make high-level concepts like that, and if you have the stats already built for humans or the scythe or warrior in this case, it is extremely straightforward to move on to the others. And I know that there's a lot more information that goes with this. You might be wondering, well, what happens about their unique abilities? And what if they have unique mechanics that the other classes do not have or the other weapons do not have? What happens with those? You cannot simply create a number for them like we did here. That's true. You cannot simply create a number, but if you did the work and you created the base class to have something that is comparable, then when you create the unique ability or the unique feature of that class, then at least you can make those qualitative comparisons. So for example, if the warrior from this example had a unique attack, then you test it for as long as necessary to make sure that That attack feels good when you use it in the game and it performs well. And then you can go on and create a different unique attack that doesn't look at all like the attack that the warrior has. And then you test for satisfaction. You see how it functions in the game. You see for the PvE matchups, for the PvP matchups, if you have them, if it feels just as good to play them. And if, for example, your game is based on balance, so like every members of the game, all classes and so on should be balanced, should be equally strong, then you can also look at match statistics and say that based on this setup, do we see that all the classes have approximately the same win rate, or do we see that one of them is pulling ahead? And if they are, do we think it's because of the unique attack they have being super strong, or is it something else? Then you can have these conversations and you can reference the stats and the basic abilities you had in the beginning. And I think the last point to cover is, well, what if the warrior has no unique attacks? He just has his stats, and that's his core value. But other classes have something special. For example, what if you make a wizard at some point and the wizard has spells, and spells is something nobody else has? What do we do then? Well, again, we want to talk about whether we want to create all the classes as equal or equally strong, or do we want to make some statement with the distribution of power in our game? Let's discuss these two cases. So if we want to make the wizard equally strong, then one way to approach it, and hopefully this gives you ideas for different methods of tackling this within this example. One way to approach an equally strong wizard is to reduce the total number of points he has distributed between attack, defense, and stamina, and maybe add a new magic parameter here to show off his uniqueness. But because he has this magic stat that everybody else doesn't have here, then it would make sense that the wizard's other stats suffer as a consequence. But that's fine because his magic stat makes up for it. His spells make up for it. This is if you want to go with the absolutely balanced approach. If you want to go with the unbalanced approach and say that, no, the wizard is clearly stronger than everybody else, but he needs other classes to defend him from monsters while he's casting his very complicated and powerful spells, then it's completely fine to either make the wizard's stats just straight up stronger and give him some other disadvantage in perhaps his play style or the gameplay situations he finds himself in. It's more difficult for him to respond to these situations, and he needs the protection of others. Or you can say that the wizard has this ability that basically makes up for his lack of other stats. And this ability is either something you can quantify. So the spell in this case is either something you can quantify that, okay, the ranger has his bow and arrow and he can shoot it all the time. The wizard has a magical missile attack, which is way stronger, but you limit it in how many times per day he can use it, or how much mana it needs, or whatever stats your game might have. So whether the classes in the game use exactly the same parameter system, or there is a fundamental unbalance in the resources the classes have available, hopefully this gives you an idea and a technique for comparing them to each other, measuring their performance in terms of time it takes to clear a monster fight, performance in PvP matches, so win rates and so on. Player satisfaction. So if you invite 10 players to play this class and have them rate the experience from 1 to 10, or tell you if they liked more or less than other classes, then perhaps that's another number you can look at for evaluating this. But no matter what the results, this technique can quickly set you on the right path and help you to have these conversations as quickly as possible and not be bogged down in the, well, if the warrior is like so, then the ranger is like so. How should we make the thief or whatever? Hopefully, you'll be way past that stage, and you'll be doing the more interesting, more exciting part of the game, which is playing it, testing it with players and other people, and get to use that to improve the game as much as possible. Anyway, that's it for today. I hope this helps you put a frame around creating multiple classes, multiple races, characters, systems, weapons, spells, abilities, and any of the content we usually find in games. And it makes your design life a little easier and a little bit more sane and straightforward. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. And as always, have fun.